Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and yes, we are one day out of the new booster pack coming to Pokemon TCG Pocket, Shining Revelry. It releases tomorrow, but what actually we got was the full set release, or I guess leaks. I'm not exactly sure how people get access to all of these cards early, but yes, we have the full set list here on PokemonZone.com, so link will be down in the description below, and we're going to go ahead and review basically this entire set and talk about how the metagame will be changing, because I do think that it will be changing a lot. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, but before we get into it, guys, I want to tell you about my new gaming chair. Alright guys, so the incredible people over at Ewin were kind enough to send me a brand new gaming chair, and it is by far the nicest chair that I have ever owned. It's an absolute game changer. I spend a lot of time at my desk playing games, uploading and recording videos, but also working. I work remotely, so a new chair like this has absolutely been incredible, and I just cannot thank them enough. They sent me the Flash XL gaming chair model, and it's extremely nice. It's built of this really durable but also breathable leather material. It's got multiple different tilt functionality, so I can recline, I can tilt the chair to customize it however I want it to be, and it came with multiple different, like, really comfortable, like, Tempur-Pedic style pillows, both like a neck pillow and a flat pillow that I use for like my backrest. It's really comfortable. It's got, again, multiple different lumbar support sort of handles on the side that you can adjust to customize the different lumbar supports. It's absolutely incredible. It's almost like I'm sitting in like a massage chair. I really just can't stress enough how comfortable this chair is. The armrests are incredible as well. They can adjust like 3 or 4 different ways. They're also magnetic, so you can kind of pop them right off and replace them. So I just cannot recommend getting one of these chairs enough. Honestly, I really do recommend it. And they were actually kind enough to also include a promo code for all of us and all of you guys watching. So you can go ahead and use the link down in the description below, and you can use the promo code MADS, that's M-A-D-S, promo code MADS, and you can get 20% off your order of your next Ewin gaming chair if you go and decide to purchase one. Thanks again to the folks over at Ewin. I really do appreciate it, and yeah, let's get right back to the video. All right, guys, let's get right into it. So, yeah, we have, I think, over 100 brand new cards. There's a ton of shiny cards as well. Not every single card in this new booster pack has a shiny variant, which is good. So at least we have a lot of new cards. So 78 plus 25 and 16 rare and shiny counterparts. So a lot of different cards that we're going to see here in this video, a lot of which really aren't worth talking about. That's the case for most sets when they come out. There's a lot of filler cards, but some cards are really relevant. So we also saw a lot of the EX cards. Like, I think every single EX card that is coming in this booster pack we've already seen and talked about. So we're not going to spend too much time like reiterating the stuff that we've talked about for previous cards, but let's get right into it. So we see the full new Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill line, and it is fairly interesting. So one thing that you're going to notice with all of the Stage 2 evolution lines from the set, or I think all of them, is that they have much more, I guess, usable attack curves or energy curves for all of the different evolutions, which is really nice to see. I think that Pokemon Pocket is at least somewhat understanding of the fact that Stage 2 Pokemon require a lot of effort to put into your deck and build around, so they're making it, I think, a little bit easier to go ahead and use these Stage 2 Pokemon. But we see here Weedle has the multiply attack, so you can put one random Weedle from your deck onto your bench, so thinning a Pokemon out of your deck is fairly good. One grass energy to use this attack. It's got 50 HP, which again isn't great. There's a lot of Pokemon that can go ahead and hit for 50 damage really early in the game, things like Skarmory and whatnot. And then Kakuna also has a 1 energy attack here, 80 HP, and that String Shot does 20 damage. You flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. That's pretty substantial. That can absolutely turn off our opponents, a 50-50 chance to turn off our opponent's Pokemon next turn. And then of course we have Beedrill, which attacks for 2 energy. So like I said, there's no like gap here in turns where we're not able to use any of these Pokemon, and that's a recurring theme throughout this entire set list, which is definitely really good. We can multiply into String Shot and then into Crushing Spear, and we've talked about Beedrill as well, definitely an interesting card. We have the Pinsir, which we've already seen with Guillotine Rush, and then we have the full Sprigatito line with Meowscarada, and this is not an EX Pokemon, but again, Sprigatito, Florigato, and Meowscarada, which is a holographic single prize Pokemon. Sprigatito there does have Cry for Help. We've already seen this card. It allows us to thin our deck, find a grass Pokemon, and put it into our hand. Florigato, or yeah, I think that's how you say Florigato. You can slash for 40 damage for 2 energies, and then here, Meowscarada, you can attack for 2 energies as well. Fighting Claws. So this Pokemon's interesting. 140 HP. Let's see if can I zoom in once more? Will it Oh, did I break it? There we go. Okay, so Meowscarada, 140 HP, retreat cost of 1. Fighting Claws, for 2 energies, we do 60 damage plus 70 more if our opponent's active Pokemon is an EX Pokemon. So 130 is actually a fairly decent number. It's a little bit of an awkward amount. It is the same amount as Arceus, so with red, we are doing a total of 150 for 2 energies on a stage 2 Pokemon. It's not terrible. 140 HP is also a little bit of an awkward amount of HP. Well, red actually doesn't do damage to non-EX Pokemon, so I guess 140 for a non-EX Pokemon is actually definitely better than an EX Pokemon, but still a little bit of an awkward amount of HP. Giant Cape can bring that to 160, so we should be safe. And I think that's actually a really important thing to talk about. We've seen red before, and we'll take a look at it again, but basically it's 20 damage to your opponent's active EX Pokemon. It's like Giovanni, but double the damage, but only for EX Pokemon. It's a really, really good card, but I think a lot of people are probably going to be running that as their main damage modification card, but a lot of the, there's a lot of Pokemon that are actually pretty decent that aren't EX Pokemon, which means that our opponent will not be able to extend and do more damage to our Pokemon if it's not an EX Pokemon, and I think that's actually pretty relevant, and it could kind of secondarily boost, or I guess make some of these non-EX Pokemon a little bit more viable. So I think that could be really interesting as well. We'll have to see if we do actually see that happen in the metagame. But yeah, Meowscarada, it's a very hard word to say, is a pretty good Pokemon. I actually think that it's pretty relevant, and again, a low energy attack cost, so we can kind of throw this in with something else, maybe Arceus Carnivine, and it could be a pretty relevant attacker, especially if we get this thing set up quick enough. If you go Carnivine into Meowscarada and then you finish off with Arceus, that could be a really effective combination, and I really do like it. Hopefully there's some more room for these non-EX Pokemon to allow us to kind of have a little bit more flexibility in the way that we're building decks, but we'll see. We do have a new Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard, and again, pretty relevant. These cards, I guess, I don't know how different or better they are than the other Charmander and Charmeleon, but again, we are able to attack on curve here, except for Charizard, but again, we can actually stoke with Charizard, so Charmander can hit with Combustion, and then Charmeleon can also hit with Combustion, which does 40 for 2 energies, and then on our turn 3, if we had evolved by then, Charizard here doesn't have the ability to attack, but we can stoke to, take 3 more energies from our zone and then attack with Steam Artillery. We've already talked a little bit about Charizard, and I'm still kind of back and forth on how good I think this new Charizard EX is going to be. I think that the main upside with something like Charizard is that we don't have to commit a ton of energies to it throughout early in the game. So if we were able to pair Charizard with a really aggressive early game attacking Pokemon that can maybe take the first KO for us, then all we really need to do is have 1 energy preemptively attached to our Charizard, and then we can bring it in. It's got 180 HP, so it should be able to live an attack from basically everything in the game other than like other Charizard, which does hit for 200. I appreciate you guys letting me know in the comment section of last video. There's some Pokemon, I guess, that can KO Charizard EX, things like maybe Mew EX, but the cool thing about this Charizard is that it doesn't get absolutely destroyed by Mew EX, so that is something to keep in mind. But yeah, basically, we only need 1 energy on this Charizard for when we bring it in, because we can kind of move it into the active spot, just use Stoke, which is going to accelerate 3 energies to the Charizard, and then we're going to go ahead, tank a hit, because I don't think many things are going to be able to KO Charizard, especially if it has Giant Cape. And then we can go ahead, attach the energy for the turn, and then we can kind of hopefully finish things off with Steam Artillery as sort of that final attacking Pokemon. It is still going to take up 6 spots in your deck, but I do think that there is sort of a niche scenario for this Charizard, and I think in certain scenarios it actually could be better than the other Charizard, even though it's doing 50 less damage. I actually still like this Charizard a lot, and I think that its ability to set itself up is pretty relevant, especially considering that it's going to be able to live at least 1 attack anyway, so I actually really like this Charizard. We also have a new Magmar here, 70 HP, Flare, 1 energy, 20 damage, so somewhat relevant. I think it does work with Blaines as well. Let me know if I'm wrong as well. You guys will let me know if I say anything incorrect in this video for sure. But this Magmar is kind of interesting, 70 HP, but 1 energy, and its attack cost can do 20 damage. And we also have Mag Mortar, which again is a little bit awkward because it goes from 1 energy to 3 energies, but it's got 120 HP, Smoke Bomb, 70 damage, and during our opponent's next turn, if the defending Pokemon tries to use an attack, your opponent flips a coin, and if it's tails, that attack just doesn't happen. So that's pretty interesting. It's a little bit different than some of the other effects we've had, which just reduce, or I guess, not allow Pokemon to do damage to Mag Mortar. So basically, if we hit somebody with Smoke Bomb, even if they play a Sabrina or a Cyrus, we still have the opportunity to turn off that Pokemon, so it would force them to get out of the active spot instead of forcing our Pokemon out of the active spot. So it's a little bit different than other effects that we've seen in the game. Again, a little bit awkward to go from 1 energy to 3, but again, it's not a terrible card, and it is somewhat interesting. And then we have Paldean Tauros, so this is a basic attacking Pokemon with high HP. So these cards are actually somewhat relevant in certain archetypes. We've seen Origin Form Palkia be somewhat relevant, but Paldea and Tauros is a fire type basic non-EX Pokemon, 110 HP. It does Blaze Tackle, 80 damage for 3 energies, 1 fire and 2 colorless, and then this Pokemon also does 10 damage to itself. So not a great amount of damage for 3 energies, but a somewhat decent Pokemon in the sense that, it's only a single prize Pokemon and it can do 80 damage. So there it is. We also have a new Tentacool and Tentacruel. There's actually a lot of repeat Pokemon in the set for some reason. I don't know why they continue to print the same Pokemon, but in different cards. It's definitely interesting. I understand it for the cards that have synergy with specific supporter cards that call out like that particular Pokemon. Things like Blaine, things like Volkner, or not Volkner, I suppose, but maybe also Volkner, but I think Lieutenant Surge as well. There's some supporter cards that like mention Pokemon's name specifically, so it kind of makes sense for us to get new versions of those Pokemon, but either way, we have a new Tentacool Tentacruel, which is again really interesting for the sense that it can just, attack for 40 damage for 1 energy. I don't think it's better than the other Tentacruel, but it is an option. It is there. And then we have another new Floatzel line. I think we already have a Floatzel line, but this is basically Zebstrika, but now water type. So again, Zebstrika kind of got pushed out of the format for various different reasons. It just became not the most useful card. I think, the game kind of power crept into it a little bit, but now we have water type Zebstrika. We have Floatzel here at 90 HP, and then you can do 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So yeah, I mean, it's literally Zebstrika, I believe, the exact same card, just water type. And then we have Wiglet and Wugtrio, which we've already talked about. I'll be really interested to see how people play Wugtrio. I think that it is actually a pretty decent Pokemon, but we'll have to see if it's better than the other water type cards. One thing I will say, because the main sort of meat and potatoes of this video will come towards the end when we get down to the trainer cards. I think that's definitely the most significant cards to come in the set. We'll see that the 18 trainer, 17 trainer, 16 trainer water decks are going to be getting a lot better, and that's my opinion, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we'll see if Wugtrio is any better than things like Palkia or Articuno. I don't think it's a bad card, and again, it's a Water EX Pokemon, so we have Misties, and we have Irida, and we have things like that. And now we see the Dondozo, so I think we saw the Tatsugiri card, or the full art version of it, in the initial sort of leaked images of the set. But now we have Dondozo, and it's a little bit disappointing. 120 HP basic Pokemon, and for 4 energies, 2 water, 2 colorless, we can do Ocean Cyclone. It does 80 damage, but it also does 10 damage to each of our opponent's bench Pokemon, so not a terrible card. Tatsugiri does have the Retreat Directive effect, which allows us to have free retreat on our Dondozo, so technically speaking, you pair these 2 cards together, and Dondozo can be a little bit flexible as sort of a leadoff option, so if you just needed sort of a buffer, a really, bulky Pokemon to sit in front of the active spot in water decks that could also be used as an attacking option, then technically speaking, Dondozo can fit that bill. And it's a little bit awkward because we have to run 2 of these Pokemon to kind of have that pivot effect go into effect, really, with Tatsugiri and Dondozo. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed. I thought that we would, maybe be getting its own sort of single prize archetype with Tatsugiri Dondozo, but it really just sort of seems like these sort of ancillary cards that could fit in some decks, but I don't think they're anything too crazy. And then again, we have Pikachu EX, and we've seen the new Pachirisu down here as well. And Pikachu EX, I think, has the potential to be one of the strongest new cards in the game. 150 plus 20 with red, that's 170. A lot of HP, a lot of damage for only 3 energies on a basic Pokemon. I'm really excited to kind of build around Pikachu and to see what we can do. Again, we'll have to see exactly how we're able to do that. But we also have a new Voltorb and Electrode. Go figure. This Voltorb here is not very impressive, 70 HP, Lightning Ball, 10 damage. And then this Electrode, 2 energy, tumbling attack, 50, flip a coin if heads, it does 30 more damage. So 50 damage for 2 energies on a stage 1 is not very impressive. 80 is actually pretty decent. I think it's similar to the other Electrode, if I'm being honest with you, but yeah, nothing too spectacular there. And then again, the Pachirisu with Plasma. I think this card is going to be really relevant, and I think that it's going to be really good in sort of explosive combo Dawn Electro-type decks. I am actually really excited to build around decks with Pachirisu. And then we have actually a Pawmot. So a lot of the Pokemon in the set are from Paldea, the Paldea region, the new Scarlet and Violet games. Pawmot is one of them. And again, it's another sort of stage 2 non-EX Pokemon line that can attack on curve, so to speak. We have Pawmi, which again can punch for 20 damage, and then we have Pawmot, which can punch for 40 damage for 2 energies, and then we can go into Pawmot, which again for only 2 energies we can electric punch 70 damage, 140 HP. Free retreat though, which that is definitely somewhat nice, but it has the counter attack ability. If this Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, do 20 damage to the attacking Pokemon. This is similar to, I think, the Poliwrath that we've had a while back. For that counter attack effect. I think we've seen it before. Rocky Helmet plus counter attack is pretty significant. If we add up all of the damage here, that's 20, that's 40, that's 60, plus 70 is 130, plus the counter attack, extra damage there. It kind of adds up to be maybe enough to KO a Pokemon if we're sort of, just kind of relying on that full attack line. Cards like these are really interesting. Like I said, at least I'm somewhat glad that they're giving us stage 2 Pokemon that we can somewhat use. Like, they're usable. I don't know how good they're going to be compared to other cards in the game, but at least they are like technically usable and you can play them in your deck and they can kind of flow and actually work in a proper way, which is actually pretty good to see. And then we have Abracadabra and another Alakazam. So again, 1 energy on Abra, 1 energy on Kadabra, and then 2 energies on Alakazam. So yet again, another example of a stage 2 line that has a proper attack curve or energy curve, which is nice to see. Again, I've said that a bunch of times, but at least they're doing something somewhat properly with stage 2 Pokemon, even though they're not EX Pokemon. Alakazam, 130 HP, Psychic type, retreat cost of 1. It has Psychic Suppression, so for 2 energies it does 80 damage, and this attack also does 20 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has any energy attached. So I don't think this card is necessarily that great, especially as a Pokemon that we're going to be kind of putting. None of these, to be fair, none of these non-EX Stage 2 Pokemon are that good. I think Meowscarada is definitely the best one so far. But you know what? At least they are technically usable, and maybe we get a non-EX format in the future where cards like these could be definitely, much more relevant or I guess usable. So I don't know. I like this art as well. I like Alakazam. We've already gotten an Alakazam that I think is better than this, but you know what? It is there. And then we have Mr. Mime. So basic Psychic Pokemon, 90 HP, juggling, 20 damage, flip 4 coins. This attack does 20 damage for each head. So it's not great for 2 energies. So it would be a little bit better, of course, if it wasn't 2 energies, because we would be able to go ahead and use this attack on our first turn. Technically speaking, we can pretty consistently get this attack off on our second turn, but realistically, it's only doing 80 max damage on average. It's doing 40 damage for 2 energies, just really not a strong card. I think there are just better options in the game. But either way, not a terrible aggro card in a sense. And then we have a new Drifloon and Drifblim, which again aren't very impressive at all, but at least again, low energy in their attack cost. 20 damage Ram and then 40 damage Gust. Really a lot of these filler cards that are basically the same as a lot of the other cards we have in the game, but just new Pokemon. Again, they kind of throw them in here just to sort of fill out the pack. A lot of useless cards that, we're forced to collect to finish our sets. And then, of course, we have Giratina, and I'm really interested. I think tomorrow when the set releases, the first deck profile video I will make will probably be some sort of a Giratina deck. And I don't know exactly the best way we're going to be playing Giratina. I think that you could play a pure Giratina deck with maybe Druddigon and Greninja and use Giratina as an attacking option, or we can kind of just throw this card in a lot of different decks with Dawn and use it as a energy battery to allow us to accelerate some additional energies early in the game to then be able to move them around with Dawn later in the game. I think that it could be really useful. I know some people are thinking about bringing back Mewtwo, but the more I think about it, I think that Mewtwo is now more relevant because of things like Red, which can extend Mewtwo's damage to 170. However, if we're playing Giratina and Mewtwo and Dawn, then we can't play Dawn and Red on the same turn. So I honestly, the more I think about it, the more I think that if we are going to go back and play Mewtwo, it's probably still correct to play it the old way, which is with Gardevoir and Mew EX and things like that. That way we can attack turn after turn for Mewtwo without having to use Dawn, and then we can use Red to extend that damage to 170. I think that's probably the most proper way to play Mewtwo. We'll have to see, but either way, I think Giratina is a really, really cool card, and it'll probably see play in a variety of different places here. We also have Gimmighoul, which does evolve into a Steel-type Gholdengo, which we'll take a look at later, but 60 HP, Chestoflage, the weirdest attack name of all time. Doesn't do any damage, colorless energy. Flip a coin if heads during your opponent's next turn. Prevent all damage and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. So we've seen again that effect before. Gholdengo is actually a very interesting Pokemon, so we'll take a look at it in a little bit. We also again have a new Machamp line. This is like I think the third, including the EX, which is again just crazy to me. But again, we can attack on curve with this thing. So low kick into Pummel into Power Press. So Pummel here for Machoke, it does 30 damage, and flip a coin if heads, it does 30 more. So technically speaking, we could do 20 into 60, and then Power Press which does 70, but if you have 2 extra energy, fighting energy that is, attached to Machamp, you do 50 more, so that's 120. So it's a little bit awkward. I know you can technically attack on curve with this thing, but it's just, it's awkward in the sense that we're not doing that full 120 on our 3rd turn technically, or when we evolve into Machamp. So it's just a little bit awkward. It does have 150 HP, and it is a fighting type. So that 120 hitting for weakness can KO an Arceus, but again, I think just another sort of lackluster, you know, stage 2 non-EX Pokemon, compared especially to something like a Rampardos, which really is sort of the crown jewel, I guess, example of non-EX stage 2 Pokemon that are relevant in the format right now. This card just really isn't as good. Rampardos can do, I think, I don't honestly forget. It's like 130, I believe, maybe more, for only 1 energy. So it's just a really, really good card. There's a reason why Rampardos is relevant, and why most cards like Rampardos that are stage 2 non-EX Pokemon aren't relevant. And I think a main reason for that is because of how easy they are to get set up. Rampardos only takes 1 energy. So for that reason, I think it's really good. We also have, again, a new Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, kind of filler cards. Hitmonlee is basically the same as the other Hitmonchan, I believe. So technically speaking, you can play 2 Hitmonlee, 2 Hitmonchan, and then you have 4 Pokemon that are fighting type that can do 30 damage for 1 energy. I don't know why you would need that many, but technically speaking, it's basically, I think, the same Pokemon as Hitmonchan, but the new Hitmonchan is a little bit more interesting, 90 HP, and then for 3 fighting energies, we can Magnum Punch for 90 damage. So that's actually a lot of HP for a basic Pokemon. Could be relevant, maybe in some decks, but I think most of the time we would rather just play Marshadow, even though it has the condition. We can do more damage for less energy. So yeah, I don't know, not super impressive. We also have a new Riolu, which has 2 energies in its attack cost. So I don't know why we would play it. Maybe it has more HP. I forget what the HP on the other Riolu is. Maybe it's 60, but yeah, new Riolu. And then that makes sense because we have Lucario EX. And I've already talked about Lucario a little bit. The card seems a little bit lackluster at first glance, but I think because we're already playing Lucario in a bunch of different decks, it's a lot easier to slot in a Lucario EX into those decks and just sort of use it as sort of an ancillary option to attack with maybe late in the game. So I think that Lucario EX actually has a lot of potential, especially because it's a fighting type Pokemon, and I think we're still going to be seeing a lot of Arceus in the format. So yeah, Lucario EX I think is actually fairly good. This new Flamigo, kind of interesting, double kick. Basic Pokemon 80 HP. You flip 2 coins and it does 50 damage for each head. So technically speaking, we could do 2 energies and do 100 damage for a basic Pokemon. That's not bad, but it is an RNG card, and 50 damage for 2 energies isn't very good. We also have a new Ekans and Arbok, which again is kind of awkward because it's 2 energies and then 3 energies, so I don't know why we would really ever use these Pokemon, but Venomous Fang does 70 damage and it poisons. And then we see here the new Paldean Wooper, so we were kind of speculative that the Paldean Wooper card would be able to poison, looking at the Venoshock attack from Clodsire, and our suspicions were correct. Paldean Wooper, 50 HP, which isn't great. Again, 50 HP is not a great number for HP, especially on a basic Pokemon. But for 1 energy, Poison Jab, 10 damage, and we poison our opponent's active Pokemon. I think that Paldean Clodsire actually has a lot of potential, but unfortunately, Arceus still exists in the format, so it's just going to be a little bit awkward to utilize Paldean Clodsire unless Arceus completely falls out of play, but I don't really think it will. I think people will definitely continue to play Arceus, at least, you know, for the first couple weeks of this new format. In fact, it might even be better, just played maybe a couple different ways. I don't know, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but yeah, Paldean Clodsire I think has the potential to be really good, but unfortunately, you know, the best, most played EX Pokemon in the game is immune to poison, so keep that in mind. We also have a new Spiritomb, Confuse Ray, 20 damage, flip a coin if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. It's interesting. I don't know if it's better than the other Spiritomb that does the spread damage. I don't really mind it. I think that confusion could be pretty decent, like in a scenario where you're going up against Dialga, to get an early confusion and some chip damage could be pretty relevant. It could kind of delay Dialga a turn or two, and this is kind of a recurring theme, in fact, and we'll talk about that again later in the video when we see one of the new supporter cards, but I think that there's actually a little bit more of a delayed process that is probably going to be happening in the format moving forward. Spiritomb has the ability to do that, so it could be useful in certain scenarios, but again, it's a 50-50 chance, it's RNG, not super reliable. We also have a new Grafaiai card, and Shroodle is the pre-evolution form of Grafaiai, so not 20 damage, but Grafaiai actually has a pretty interesting ability. So this is the first card that allows us to poison our opponent's Pokemon with an ability from a Pokemon from our bench. So poison coding reads that once during your turn, you may flip a coin if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. So again, this kind of makes sense, right? We can play this in other Venoshock decks things like Scolipede or, of course, Paldean Clodsire. It's a 50-50 chance, but we should be able to have 2 Grafaiai on our bench to increase our odds. We can flip 2 coins to get that poison and then do the full 120 damage with Venoshock. I think that it's a fairly okay card. Like I said, I don't think that it's bad. We've seen a card similar to this in Hypno from Genetic Apex, where instead of poison, it was sleep. You put your Pokemon to sleep, it's a coin flip. So I think that sleep as an effect is just in general more strong than poison, and Hypno doesn't really see any play ever. But again, there are poison synergy cards with things like Paldean Clodsire. We could even maybe play this in really other decks, maybe Darkrai decks, to deal even more additional chip damage. It's not a terrible card, I really don't think so. We'll have to see if it sees play. Really, any sort of form of passive extra damage is pretty important and impactful, especially in, you know, Pokemon Pocket where the Pokemon's HP are so low. But we'll have to see. I really actually kind of like Grafaiai, but who knows? Maybe it'll see play, maybe not. If we go down here, we do see the full evolution line for Tinkaton EX. The more I think about Tinkaton, the more I actually think it's not a bad Pokemon. We'll have to see if it's really better than other decks, but I actually think it's totally fine. And like I said, we can attack on curve here. We have Corkscrew Punch with Tinkatink for 1 energy. Tinkatuff can do Tenacious Hammer for 2 metal energies, 30 damage, flip a coin if heads, it does 30 more. So we can go 20 into 60. It's basically the same attack as Terrific Thumping from Tinkaton EX, but just less damage. And this attack here does 80 damage, but if you flip a coin of heads, you do 80 more damage. So Tinkaton's a really interesting card. I think that RNG cards like this, it's basically like Marowak, like on steroids. It's very, very strong. It's got a decent amount of HP for a Stage 2 Pokemon, 170, so we should be able to live an attack most of the time. However, we are weak to fire, so that's a little bit scary if Charizard becomes, you know, the new Charizard becomes popular. But either way, 160 is 160, and that's going to take the KO on a lot of different Pokemon. It's just a 50-50 chance, but at least we can go ahead and play Tinkaton with things like maybe Skarmory as a lead-off option, or even in Dialga decks as a late-game attacking option. I don't think the card is terrible. We'll really just have to see how well it performs in the metagame. And then, yes, we have a new Revavroom and Varoom cards. These cards aren't super interesting in my mind. I don't love card effects like this. Also, 1 energy from Varoom into 3 energies with Revavroom, just a bit awkward here. 110 HP, 3 energy, Spinning Drift, 70 damage, flip a coin of heads during your opponent's next turn. Prevent all damage and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. We've seen it before. I don't think these cards really end up being that relevant. I think the best example of a card like this is probably Dugtrio, the old Dugtrio card, which again doesn't really see much play anyway. And then here it is, Gholdengo, which is probably one of the more interesting cards that is coming out in this expansion. It is basically Celebi, but as a Stage 1 non-EX Pokemon for the Metal type. So basically, Gholdengo here, Stage 1 Pokemon, 120 HP, retreat cost of 2, 3 energies, and its attack cost. We have Scintillating or Scintillating Surfing, 50 damage, flip a coin for each metal energy attached to this Pokemon. It does 50 damage for each head. So basically exactly like Celebi. The only difference with Gholdengo is that we have to have 3 energies to even use this attack, where Celebi can attack with 2 energies. It's also a basic Pokemon. Gholdengo is a Stage 1 Pokemon. They have the same amount of HP. Now, this is interesting because we have Dialga. So I know, like, immediately off the rip, people are like, oh, this is cool. We can, you know, play Dialga and basically Celebi. We have kind of a similar version of that list, but now with Dialga. And Dialga can stay around for a long time, so realistically, we can get like 6, 8, maybe 10 energies on Gholdengo pretty reliably, and that's a lot of damage output. But the thing is, very similar to Celebi, we're just not really able to live an attack once you know, we kind of move in and we attack with Gholdengo. 120 HP just isn't great. It's very easily revenge KO'd. However, like I said, I mean, a lot of Pokemon or a lot of decks are going to be running red, and Gholdengo isn't affected by red. So the Pokemon basically has to do like 120 or more HP as like a baseline, and if we have Giant Cape on Gholdengo, that goes to 140. So technically speaking, it does have the chance to live attacks from a lot of Pokemon in the game, but it gets absolutely bodied by things like Gallade and other cards like that. It's also weak to fire, so I don't know. I don't think this card is terrible, but we'll have to see. I think it's probably going to fall to kind of the same degree that Celebi falls to, and the downside that Celebi has right now. Whereas if you're not finishing the game with this Pokemon, it probably isn't living after you attack. So it's a little bit awkward, and Dialga probably isn't taking many KOs in its own right. So keep that in mind. I don't think that Gholdengo is terrible. Maybe it becomes really, really good. I think, of course, it can do basically unlimited damage, which is definitely really good, but we'll have to see kind of how it all works out in those Dialga decks. And then we have a new Raticate, nothing super special here, Tackle and Tackle, 10 and 50. We have a new Jigglypuff here, which does roll out for 20 damage, and then we have a new Wigglytuff. And this card is somewhat interesting. It's a Stage 1 colorless Pokemon, 100 HP. and it has the Comforting Song ability. So we can heal 20 damage once per turn from our active Pokemon, and this effect should stack. So basically speaking, if we have 2 Wigglytuff on our bench, we can heal 40 damage every turn from our active Pokemon. That is pretty substantial, especially considering in decks where, you know, we already have like Irida, we have Potion, we have Giant Cape, we've got Erika's, so there's a lot of healing in the game right now. We also have the Flagrant Flower Garden Shaman. I think that the Shaman card is probably better than this card because, again, it can heal all of your Pokemon. It's a basic Pokemon, but nonetheless, I mean, we could play like a full healing archetype, and I do think that this card is kind of meant to go with Bibarel, which heals itself after it attacks. So, you know, maybe we see some really fun and interesting Wigglytuff Bibarel decks, maybe with Manaphy and Irida and Potions, Giant Capes, things like that. It could be really, really fun and interesting. We'll have to see just how, I guess, useful these archetypes end up being, but either way, I think that Wigglytuff is actually a fairly cool Pokemon. It's also a colorless Pokemon, which I guess we're not really attacking with in any way, but we could kind of pair this in any deck. And yeah, it's somewhat interesting, I'm not going to lie. And then, okay, so we have a new Licky Tongue. These are, again, throwaway cards. I'm not really going to spend too much time talking about them. And we've already talked about Bibarel, so I think the best ways to play Bibarel is probably going to be either with Dialga to get this thing set up a little bit easier, similarly to how we're playing Arceus in Dialga decks already, or we can play it with Manaphy to use water energies to get this thing loaded up with energy, and then we can also play Irida to heal this Pokemon, combined with maybe things like Flagrant Flower Shaman or Comforting Song Wigglytuff, Potions, Giant Capes, all of that good stuff. We could actually be very annoying to deal with. 160 HP is also a lot, so similarly to Exeggutor, kind of one of the few Pokemon. 160 really is sort of the new HP threshold for these EX Pokemon. That is kind of enough to keep you safe, even from the strongest Pokemon utilizing Red to do extra damage. So, Bibarel has potential. We'll have to see exactly how good it ends up being, but it is somewhat interesting to see that we also have Wigglytuff to pair with it. There's a new Baniri and a Lopunny card. Again, very cookie cutter, you know, stale cards that we've seen all over the place. 20 damage and then 30 damage here on a stage 1 Pokemon. We also have Cylizar, and this is somewhat of an interesting card. It's a basic Pokemon, a new kind of flavor aggro card here. Colorless, basic, 80 HP, retreat cost of 1. I would have liked to see a free retreat on this Pokemon, but it probably would have been too good if it did have free retreat. Over acceleration, so 1 colorless energy, 20 damage during your next turn. This Pokemon's over acceleration does plus 20 damage. So I'm pretty sure this effect doesn't like stack turn after turn, but maybe it does. I don't exactly know how that wording really comes into play, but 20 damage in the next turn we're doing 40. Maybe on the next turn we're doing 60. I'm not entirely positive, but it's not a terrible card, and you know, it can be used in certain aggro decks. I don't think that it's terrible, and again, it's colorless, so it's super flexible. Now we're getting into the good stuff, and this is the stuff that I really wanted to spend some time talking about for this video. A lot of the Pokemon in the set did seem a little bit lackluster. Of course, I know some people were definitely talking about that, you know, when we were kind of reviewing a lot of these cards in previous videos, and I think that for the most part, when we often see new cards, they do kind of seem lackluster. Like, it's pretty rare that we see a card preemptively and we go, oh wow, this card is really, really good. I think that we're lacking, like, we have all of the cards that are coming in the set, so we have that context, but we don't necessarily know like how the format is going to react and sort of what all of the different synergies will end up being. So we'll have to see. I think that some of these EX Pokemon definitely have potential. Some of these non-EX Pokemon also have potential, but I would say that the really important cards for the set are actually the 4 supporter cards. We're not actually getting any new item cards, which is kind of interesting, but we are getting 4 new supporter cards, and I think that they're all actually pretty good. We've seen Iono before, and a lot of people are really high on Iono. I am not as much of an avid believer. We'll have to see. I don't think that -1 card advantage to shuffle your hand into your deck and then, you know, draw that many cards is super relevant. I think that it can be really good in certain scenarios. In stage 2 decks or in decks that are playing multiple evolution Pokemon, it can be a nice hand refresh. But I think for the most part, if we'd like have a Professor's Research in our hand, we would probably most of the time rather play it to at least have +1 card advantage. But yeah, I mean, it can be definitely really good in certain scenarios. I think it'll probably find its way into 18 trainer decks, as well as high, you know, Pokemon quantity, high Pokemon decks, things that are playing a lot of evolution Pokemon. It acts very similarly to Pokemon Communications, but again, I don't think it's as good because it's not targeted, but not a bad card. I think it's just a little bit niche, and I don't think it'll find its way into like every deck, but I do think Iono is somewhat good, and I think it will be relevant, honestly. I think it could help a lot of stage 2 decks, primarily, which I think is a really big upside. I think a couple of cards here that we're going to take a look at actually make stage 2 decks a bit better, and that's sort of really where we're going to go in this video, is we're going to talk about how the meta is actually going to change due to these new cards, specifically these supporter cards. So Iono is that one example. We also see 2 new cards here that we did not get previously in the leaks, and one of those is Pokemon Center Lady. So This is a healing card that heals 30 HP. It's a supporter, but also this is from any one of our Pokemon, not just the active. And then it also recovers from all status conditions or special conditions, so kind of an additional bonus effect. But this is a generic healing card. Paired with Potion, now you can kind of play sort of healing style decks in archetypes that aren't just grass or water, which is actually pretty relevant. And I really actually am glad that we have Pokemon Center Lady. Of course, it's not as good as Erica, and it's not as good as Irida for sure, but at least we can use it for like fire type Pokemon or fighting type Pokemon or dark type Pokemon. We can use it for really anything. And you can even pair Pokemon Center Lady in decks where we're already playing Irida and Ericas to do even more healing. So I don't think that it's a terrible card. I don't know if it's really going to be worth running in most decks, but maybe in some decks like Bibarel, it could actually be fairly relevant. We've seen Red already, and like I said, I think that Red is really important. It is really our true counter to things like Giant Cape, which gives, of course, 20 HP to Pokemon. Now we can do 20 more damage to our opponent's EX Pokemon. I think this is going to be probably the #1 damage modification card that we're going to see in basically a ton of decks. Of course, most decks in the game right now are focused around EX Pokemon, specifically the attacking Pokemon in the deck, right? The decks that are, or the Pokemon that are in the active spot for most of these decks are EX Pokemon. So being able to do 20 extra damage to those Pokemon is definitely really relevant. But I think on a side note, what Red is going to do is secondarily make archetypes and attacking Pokemon that aren't EX Pokemon actually better, right? Especially those like stage 1 or stage 2 non-EX Pokemon that actually still have a lot of HP. We can still play Giant Cape, and now our opponent is not going to be able to do additional damage to that Pokemon. Things, you know, that could be relevant or weren't relevant before could be a little bit more relevant now. And I think secondarily, Red actually buffs non-EX Pokemon, which is definitely really, really good, and I think healthy for the format. We'll have to see how much it really impacts some of these non-EX archetypes. But like I said, things like Rampardos are even scarier now because, you know, Red doesn't work with Rampardos, but Rampardos can use Red to do more damage to our opponent's EX Pokemon. Even things like Magnezone, which have a lot of HP, again, are kind of immune to Red. So interesting to see how Red actually changes the format, but I think that it's going to see play in a lot of different decks. And aside from the non-EX Pokemon stuff that I just mentioned, I think that Red is actually going to be really, really important for a lot of the decks that kind of got power crept out of the format when Giant Cape was released. So I think that there's actually a ton of different EX Pokemon and just, you know, strategies in general that were really consistent, maybe really aggressive, really good archetypes, but they just didn't do enough damage, especially when Giant Cape was released, right? Oftentimes, Pokemon are just out of range of you to KO them when they have Giant Cape, and now we have sort of an answer to that. So I think that things that maybe weren't super relevant in the previous format might have the chance to be more relevant now. It also makes certain Pokemon just absolutely terrifying, like Arceus now does 150 with Red. Gyarados does 160 now with Red, which is, again, absolutely terrifying. And again, things like Pelkin go up to 170. So nothing is safe. And again, we talked about Mewtwo a little bit previously in this video. And yeah, I think that Mewtwo now being able to hit for 170 could be a somewhat viable archetype. We'll have to see. And then lastly, we have Team Rocket Grunt. I did not expect to see this card come to Pokemon TCG Pocket. This is what I am calling the anti-Misty card, or the reverse Misty card. This card reads, you flip a coin until you get tails, just like Misty, and for each heads, you discard a random energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. It says random because if you're running like multi-energy, you know, if you're going up against an opponent that plays like, you know, different types of energies, you can't pick and choose which one you want to remove. It's random. But yeah, basically speaking, this is a card that we can play in any deck that allows us to discard energies from our opponent's active Pokemon, effectively kind of stalling or slowing down our opponent's strategies. I don't know, like at first glance, this card seems crazy to me, and I think that most decks would benefit from playing this card in their deck, but we'll have to see if Team Rocket Grunt ends up seeing play in like almost every deck early on in the format, or if it just doesn't really see its way into many decks. I'd be really curious to see how many people actually include Team Rocket Grunt in their decks, but I do think that it is going to be extremely impactful in a couple of different scenarios. The #1 scenario that I think Team Rocket Grunt is very useful in is actually against Dialga and Arceus. If you really think about Dialga and Arceus and how the deck functions, it's very, very consistent in how it gets to where it wants to go. Now, it's a deck that really loves going second because then you're ahead on the energy curve. And of course, if you get those 2 energies on Dialga and those Metallic Turbos start coming out, there's really nothing you can do. That Arceus will get set up, and it's probably going to end up just sweeping your team. But now with Team Rocket Grunt, technically speaking, any deck has the ability to basically stop Dialga from Metallic Turboing a turn or two, earlier or later than it otherwise would have. And I think that's actually a direct counter to Dialga, which again is by far the #1 most played deck in the format right now. So technically speaking, there's a lot of really good supporter cards and trainer cards in the game right now. So I think that this card will definitely see play in like 18 trainer decks and decks that have a lot of space for trainer cards in the list. But overall, I think that if a lot of people are playing Team Rocket Grunt, Dialga could see a massive drop off in its overall win rate. I think that Team Rocket Grunt overall is actually really effective against most tempo deck strategies. And tempo decks meaning like decks that aren't like super aggressive in fast pace, or really late game sort of setup decks where you're setting up your bench Pokemon. Things like Dialga and Arceus really do rely on, getting those energies on your active Pokemon and then attacking on turn 2 or turn 3. So Team Rocket Grunt really could stall those decks and kind of make them a little bit less relevant. In the format right now, those tempo-based decks, things like Dialga and Arceus, are very, very relevant. And I think that Team Rocket Grunt is actually almost a perfect counter if, of course, you flip heads. It's just like Misty's. It's going to be very, very inconsistent, but again, if you have room in your deck, it could be very, very impactful in certain matchups. And like I said, hopefully this allows the games to maybe be stretched out a little bit, right? To stop your opponent, like install them for a turn or maybe 2 turns, is a massive deal in Pokemon Pocket. If Dialga isn't able to Metallic Turbo until turn 4 or turn 5, then you basically won the game, and I think that's really, really impactful. Some archetypes are not going to be impacted by this energy removal. And I know a lot of people were pretty high on Beedrill and its energy removal effect. And initially with Beedrill, I was like, well, we're not going to be using Beedrill until turn 3 or turn 4, so the energy removal didn't seem that relevant. But now, when paired with Team Rocket Grunt, maybe we can start removing those energies from early in the match. So that is pretty impactful, and I think that it actually has potential to be a really decent control type strategy that I think could be really relevant. But yeah, I think that Team Rocket Grunt isn't super effective or useful against those aggressive decks that have Pokemon that attack for only like 1 energy. For example, things like Exeggutor and Weavile. So like I said, if everybody ends up playing Team Rocket Grunt, I think that could open up the path for some of those well-established aggro archetypes to be even better than they are right now. Weavile, Darkrai, and Exeggutor and Arceus are 2 of some of the best aggressive archetypes in the entire game right now, and I don't think they would really care if they got hit with a Team Rocket Grunt. Technically speaking, that takes 1 less turn of you to be able to attach to like your benched Arceus or your Darkrai or whatever, but technically speaking, we can still attack that turn with our active Pokemon. So it's a card that isn't super impactful against those particular aggro strategies, which again, if a lot of people are playing Team Rocket Grunt, then those aggressive decks become even better. So keep your eye out for some of those aggressive, fast-paced aggro decks like Weavile, Darkrai, like Exeggutor, like Carnivine, like Sudowoodo, like Skarmory. So decks like that, I think, could actually find a really nice place in this upcoming metagame if Team Rocket Grunt becomes very popular. The other, I guess, way that I think Team Rocket Grunt might impact the metagame is for those late game stage 2 decks, right? I think a big downside to some of those, stage 2 evolution decks is that they don't really do much until the late game, and most decks are really well paced enough to where on turn 2 or turn 3, they're pretty aggressive and can do a lot of damage. So for decks that really take a lot of time to set up, Team Rocket Grunt might buy you that extra turn or 2 before your opponent is able to start attacking you, and I think that could be an extremely big deal. So I really like Team Rocket Grunt. I actually think a card like this could be extremely toxic and bad for the metagame, but I think as the metagame stands right now, this could be a card that really opens up the way for some of those fast-paced aggressive archetypes, and also some of those late game setup Pokemon or archetypes that were setting up those Pokemon on our bench. So I actually really like Team Rocket Grunt. I think that it's going to change the metagame a lot if enough people play it. And to be fair, the one elephant in the room that I think we need to address truthfully, and I know, like, I'm not trying to manipulate the metagame at all when I say this, but 18 trainer decks are becoming very, very good. I don't know if the people, the developers for Pokemon Pocket are really, if they have like 18 trainer in their mind when they're designing the game or designing the cards, but like in an expansion like this, in a booster pack, The Pokemon don't seem like super crazy good, but we're getting 4 really good brand new supporter cards, which again, in 18 trainer decks, the more great supporter cards and trainer cards you have, the better the deck becomes. So things like Articuno, Palkia, even Pachirisu, those 18 trainer decks I think are going to be even better than they were before, and that is a little bit terrifying. Hopefully this upcoming format when ranked mode comes out isn't just all 18 trainer Articuno decks, but it very well could end up being the case. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that's not the case, but you never really know. 18 trainer Articuno is honestly one of the top archetypes in the game right now, and I do think it got even better with Red and Team Rocket Grunt and other just great cards that we can pair with it. So yeah, that's all of the new cards. If we go down here, we can see all of the new rarity versions. Meowscarada looks really cool. This Buzel? I don't even know how to say that Pokemon's name. Tatsugiri. These cards look really, really cool. This Wigglytuff is interesting. It's like really high def and close up, which is weird. Gholdengo, Grafaiai. And if we go down here, these are the full art EX Pokemon. They all look definitely really, really cool. I specifically like this Pikachu. I just think he looks really, really funny. The Giratina and the Lucario look absolutely epic. And then if we go down here, we can see the full art trainer cards here. We have Iono, Red, which you've already seen, Pokemon Center Lady, Team Rocket Grunt. I think the art on these cards looks phenomenal. And yes, we are getting a ton of extra rarity cards here. So we have an immersive Giratina EX, which looks absolutely crazy. I would love to see the animation for that. And then we have 4 rainbow rarity cards: Pikachu, Paldean Clodsire, Tinkaton, and Bibarel EX. They all look definitely really cool. And then these are all of the shiny cards if you're interested. Good luck opening these packs. I'm probably going to empty my wallet and go broke opening all these packs to get these shiny cards, but they look definitely really, really cool. Again, not all of the Pokemon have shiny Pokemon, just some of them do, which is maybe disappointing, but hopefully we can collect them all here. And then lastly, we're going to end the video here talking about this guy right here. And yes, this is a gold Pokeball. So this might be like, if any of these cards were actually worth tangible money value, gold Pokeball might be one of the most expensive cards in the game. Again, if it had like a dollar value. Pokeball is a card that is in literally every deck. So to have this extra gold rarity version of it is definitely really cool. This is the first time we're seeing a gold rarity, or really an additional rarity of any item card in the game. So it's cool that it's Pokeball, but I don't know, stuff like this is kind of interesting to me because like in the official Pokemon card game, like gold Pokeballs and like they call them staple cards that have like higher rarity versions are oftentimes really sought after and really expensive because everybody wants to have them in their deck. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. Another long video. I do kind of apologize for how long this one turned out to be. Anyway, hopefully nothing was like super incorrect in this video, but you guys will comment down below and you'll let me know if anything I said doesn't make sense. But anyway, guys, yeah, stay tuned because tonight, or I guess tomorrow in like 1 in the morning, I think on Eastern time is when the set releases, and I will be up and I will be, opening as many packs as I possibly can and playtesting immediately. I'm going to be testing all of these different decks and different builds with all of these new cards. And yeah, stay tuned because tomorrow I will be uploading maybe a deck profile or two. And then we get right into talking about the new metagame. So if you're new to the channel, or even if you're not new to the channel, definitely subscribe and stay tuned because we're going to be covering all of the new best decks and strategies that are coming to Pokemon Pocket with all of these new cards. So definitely stay tuned. I think the metagame will change quite a bit if I'm being 100% honest with you. I don't think a lot of the new Pokemon are super relevant or super, super good. They might end up being good. We'll have to see. But I think that these new trainer cards and supporter cards are really going to change the metagame a lot. And I'm really excited to see how that all happens. And hopefully you guys are too. So definitely get to, definitely stay tuned. Definitely really interested. It's going to be fun. I can't wait. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Peace out, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah, bye.